This video is to show using PowerPanto in Quilter's Creative Touch 5 Pro version. This is in simulation mode, and I will use the terms click, touch, tap, select interchangeably. I'd like to use the same word, but I forget. So whichever word I use, it all means the same. So we'll start by touching pantograph. We need to set the safe area, so I'm just clicking down at the bottom. That's what you do when you're in simulation mode. You want to make sure in the Panto mode that PowerPanto is selected, and the first thing we want to do is measure the width. So we're going to click on the yellow ruler across the top and make sure that the icon selected is the one with the green slanted line. If it's not selected, you just click on it over there and it will be. And you can tell it's selected. It says quilt width across the top. And when I move my cursor over a spot and then I touch it, that's the same thing as moving your needle over that spot. So, I would move my needle to a very specific place at my quilt top. For when you're using PowerPanto and you're measuring this width, this is a very critically placed position. So you want to have your needle where it is aligned with where the uppermost stitches of the first row will hit, and also with where the leftmost stitches will align down the left side. So you want to position your needle as exact as you can over the intersection of these horizontal and vertical positions. And then when you know that you have, then you click on the left side. Then when you go to set the right side, you move your machine across. You do not have to stay up at the top. You don't have to stay straight. You just go to the right side, and you want to be the same distance from the right edge as you were from the left edge. And when you get to that point, then have your needle positioned right above where those rightmost stitches should align, and click on the right side down there, and then that gives you your quilt width. In this case, it's 28 inches. The next thing you want to do is click on the black sewing machine down there, and then your machine is going to move to the center of that width that you just measured. Your needle will be right above that center point, and you need to mark that spot. Mark it so that it's not going to come off or fall off, or that it will be there for you. Use painter's tape with a dot marked on it, or removable pin, or you could pull a bobbin thread, whatever you want to do. But be sure to mark that spot, and then when you do, click Apply Measurement. And then that width auto-fills into the total width on your Panto Stacker screen. The next amount you want to complete is the total height. So click in there, and we'll just say 45, and we'll say OK. So now this represents our quilt. If we want to see it in reference to the safe area, then there's a selection in the lower left corner. We can click there, and now the safe area will show. It'll show in red once we select the pattern. This sew through clipped, you want that to be checked, because as you go into the quilt screen, that will take care of all the ends of stitching that aren't connected. You won't have to optimize. That's what I'm trying to say. That keeps you from having to optimize. All the ending lines and beginning lines of stitching that normally would be a jump stitch, there will be a straight line stitched there. So that's a very nice feature. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is select our pattern. We can select the pattern up here or down at the bottom. And the first one that we're going to select, I'm going to select the duck. That's not the one we're going to continue on with. I just want to show you how cute the things you can do with the ducks are with this flip, these selections under flip. They look like little dominoes. Each time you touch one, it flips two different ways. So right now the ducks are flipped to the left. I click on it again, they flip back to the right. So this one, and you can just watch the ducks, and I'm clicking each one twice because with each one they'll orient a little different. So PowerPanto is supposed to be very fast, but you can spend a lot of time playing here. When you're ready to go back to it being the design you brought in, if none of those are what you're looking for, then you just click on the flip and the red X, and it takes you back to the design. And now you can see the red line that's reflecting what your safe area is. So we're going to go back into select pattern, and we are going to select the shamrocks, and we'll open them. You can see that they are very close to each other, closer than what you would want. And you have all of these excuse me, all of these choices down below to size the pattern and space it the way that you would like. You can click on the minus or plus. You could just click directly on the number and change it. The spacing minus and plus, or you can click directly just to type in a different number. Down in pattern fitting, this has to do, the one on the left side has to do with horizontal wrapping, and then the block to the right of pattern fitting has to do with vertical wrapping. You cannot select both at the same time. It has to be one or the other, or you may not want either selected. It's just a matter of which one makes you think the pattern looks better. We are going to separate these rows a little bit from each other. We can go into options, and with the show grid checked, we can say OK. And now we can see each little blue block that represents a 1-inch square. That kind of gives us a better frame of reference of what size our pattern really is. We can click on this magnifying glass with the plus and click a little ways down. That really blows it up, and it's much easier to do your vertical spacing, horizontal, your sizing when you're not looking at the entire quilt all at once. So we want to separate these lines, and they are maintaining their design integrity, shall we say. And then when you have it spaced like you want it to be, then you can click back on fit and back on the X up in the top left corner, and you're back in your Panto Stacker screen. When you are content that you have done everything with the size and space, then you can click Save Panto and give it a file name. So I'm going to say Test 2 since I'd already tested it once, and say Enter and Save. And now let's just pretend that you really wanted to do a little less vertical spacing. Then you can resave it. You would just click on Save Panto again, and I'm going to do that one. We're doing that one, and say Save, and it says, do you want to override it? And you just say yes. So don't think you have to have it exact when you save it, so that you can't do a little more tweaking if you wanted to. So now, once you have saved it, if you needed to close out and then come back in and re-pull that design up, you would click on Read Panto, and then you select it and say Open, and then there it is. So that's how you would get back to that saved design. So at this point, we are ready to quilt. Just that fast, and you click Sew in Zones. It asks, would you like to save this zone sewing session? We're going to say no, but if you had a hoop frame, you would say yes. You're now in the quilting interface screen, and your safe area is showing up there in the top left in little numbers. we are going to first go into Zone Manager before we do anything else. And I do want to point out right now under Zone Center, it's showing Zone 1. If we were to go ahead and start quilting, Zone 1 is what we quilt. So we click on Zone Manager and you get a warning message, and this is because if we had already placed our quilt zone, it's referred to zones instead of rows now. So if we had already placed this zone, then we would need to replace it again after going into Zone Manager. But we still wish to open the Zone Manager. And you will notice over here on the left under Zone Selection, Zone number 1, and that's what was showing on the screen before this. Whatever is selected here, when you say OK, is what's going to print on the other screen. So if you needed to quit for the day and you had gotten down to, say, Zone 4, then you could leave yourself a note. When I start back, start with Zone 5, and then you would open your design back up and come into Zone Manager and click down to 5 and say OK, and then you would be ready to begin quilting right where you left off, because you would have already marked where when Zone 4 stitched out, you would have already made your mark that you would move your needle above to place for Zone 5. We're going to move this back up to Zone number 1. Now this zone scale percent. So the width is 100 because you never lose out on the width with a rolling rail frame. But now height. The reason that this is 95 is because it's a this, in my particular case, it's based on a QCT5, and the reason that it's not 100 is because as you keep stitching these zones, the quilt keeps building up on your take-up rail, reducing the amount of what your safe area is. And your safe area, that's what these zones are based on, is that safe area. So that's why you scale down the height to make up for that loss of quilting space in that zone height amount. So for a QCT5, I've changed it to 95. If you had a QCT14 plus or a QCT15, you would change it to a 90 and say OK. So that's what that figure is. And so that zone size is letting you know. You saw in the screen before where it had the safe area, it was 42 by, I forget what it was, but now the 11.4 is a little bit less. And just so you see how it changes, if I were to change this to a 90, now it's changed it. So each zone, the maximum height a zone can be is 10.8. So there could be a time where you have an unusually large quilt. You may have to adjust, but we're going to change it to 95 because that should keep you safe in quilting your zones for the rest of the quilt. And you will see how each zone is the same size with the exception of the first and last zones, which have partial rows. So I hope that was clear enough that made sense. Under Zone Preferences, you have choices here, and they toggle back and forth between what the choices are. And you can also click on any of these blue arrows, and that will explain what that choice entails. So this first one, this is not the choice we're going to use, but I want to select it now just so that you see it. This would be where you set the top left corner of your design, and what you would do is move your needle over the exact spot of when you were using the yellow ruler to begin your width measurement. You would move your needle over that point, the intersection of that horizontal and vertical position of where the top stitch is aligned and the leftmost stitch is aligned, and then you would click on A. And by default, the lock is width. The lock width is locked in place, which means the width that you measured, that's the width that would stitch out. You don't have to set B, and then once you do, we'll just go ahead and do that. Once you select B, then C and D are optional. You may have a case where on your quilt top you want to have all 4 corners to place, and that would be how you would do it. But and then when you go to mark your zone 2, then you're going to have different choices than what you'll have in when you're using the center zone placement. It has a move left or move right or something like that. It'll make sense when you see it though. So here, anyway, we're going to go back into Zone Manager because we want to use the zone placement center, and that's to start that first partial row. We'll be using that mark that we already made at the top center of our quilt back when we were in the yellow ruler option. And this is just a matter of your zone start position, sewing from left or alternating. Down here, the little pictures make it pretty clear how it's going to stitch. If you have the first one selected, it's going to stitch from left to right. If you have this second back and forth, it's going to start on the left and stitch across. There'll be a jump stitch down to the next row, and then it'll stitch from right to left. If for some reason you were to go into optimize and say remove all, you would remove that jump stitch. Our last choice there is continuous, which it's going to stitch across, stitch a straight line down, stitch back from right to left, stitch down, however many rows that your safe area will allow you to do. So say OK. So now we need to go into settings and make sure all of these options are set like we want them to. I have fast selected just for demo's sake. Normally you would be slow or medium. Tie off count, that's for micro stitches. You can make that whatever you want. I just picked a smaller number for a demo. If you toggle this, it's back and forth stitching. I have automatic bobbin pull not selected, and posit trim line is not selected. And then your stitches per inch, you can set that plus or minus to whatever length you want and say OK. If you want the lines showing in here, then you have the show grid there. So now we're going to move our needle over that spot that we marked in the first screen that we were in the pantograph screen, and we're going to have our needle there. So I clicked there to represent that's where the needle is, and now I'm going to click down here. I want you to notice these diamonds that are right underneath this green rectangle. Right now they're gray, and that signifies you have not placed this zone. So it's not ready to stitch yet. But as soon as I click in this green rectangle, they turn blue. So you know that you've placed your zone when you see that happen. So the first thing that we need to do, if we don't want to do trace, you can do trace if you want, and make sure of how it's going to stitch. You would let it start in and then hit stop. But when you're ready for it to pull bobbin, or you could go into here and say move to start point. Move to start point. But now we are ready to pull the bobbin, and take that single stitch and then pull up the bobbin thread and then hit sew. And you can see how it's doing a straight line stitch across the top. It is stitching that partial row first, and then it's doing a straight line stitch down the right side and then going back over to the left where it will stop stitching. And at this point we need to pull the bobbin first. Do not click on finish zone until you've pulled your bobbin. So click on that, and since I had automatic bobbin pull deselected, I'm going to say release carriage, and then I'm going to move my machine back a couple of inches, grab the top thread, move the machine back forward, and then take that single stitch and pull up the bobbin thread and cut it, and then say back. So now we've pulled the bobbin, and we can say finish zone, proceed to next zone. It wants to know if you've completed the zone. Say yes. And now you have some on-screen choices if you want to make one of them. The first one is single stitch. You can make a sewing mark, or you can pull the bobbin. We're going to go with the first one. You'll notice this 1-inch square right here, and that represents the 1 inch around that center mark right there of the placement. And these dark blue lines represent where stitches are going to hit. Like this stitch is that leaf right there, and you see that. This one is where the stitch of the next row is going to hit. So if you have a 1-inch piece of tape right here, you know that this will stitch over that tape if you don't remove it. So we're going to make that single stitch, and then you see it flashes done, and we're going to say continue. And then you get some questions on your screen, and you can say do not show again. It's verifying that you've got your zone properly placed. You say yes, and then the machine, when you click OK here, the machine is going to move up. So we're going to say OK, and then what it wants you to do is to advance your quilt onto the take-up rail so that that mark you just made is pretty close to being underneath your needle. So we say OK, and then it wants to verify that that's what you've done. And you'll notice that this seems a little farther down, and that has to do with when we were in Zone Manager and we changed to be either 90 or 95, it's going to look a little farther from your take-up rail, and that's because your safe area is decreasing as you continue to advance on your take-up rail. So this is allowing for that, and that keeps you from having to go back in and keep changing your safe area to keep accommodating what a zone amount can be. So we are now going to move our needle over this. We're going to make it be exact. You may need to do release carriage, but you want to get that needle right over your mark that you made, and then again you see that these are grayed out, so you haven't made your zone placement. So click on that, and now the zone is placed, and it's ready to for you to pull the bobbin. Take that single stitch and pull the bobbin thread up to the top and hit sew. If you needed to do a repair for some reason, then you hit stop, release carriage, go into your red toolbox, touch release sewing machine. You now have total manual control to put in a new bobbin, do some test stitches. Don't click OK until you're ready to give control back to QCT. Then you do that, and then pull out enough stitches so that you can tie a knot and bury those threads now or later. Then you want to tap repair pattern, and you'll probably want to go to either last stitch or closest stitch and trace back a little bit, stop it. Use these features to get that needle right over where you knotted those threads so that you're picking up where the sewing needs to start back. You'll pull bobbin, take that single stitch, and then pull that thread up, maybe bury them later, and then sew and finish this zone. And you can see how again it's sewing straight lines down the side and then stitching back across to stop. So now we're ready to pull the bobbin. And you notice this red line, that is representing your safe area in this screen. I just want to point that out. So we're going to pull the bobbin, we're going to release the carriage, move the machine back a couple of inches, grab that top thread, and then pull it back forward so the needle's over where the stitching ended. Take a single stitch and pull it up and cut it. And now stay back. And we can select finished Have you completed and pulled your bobbin? Yes. At this point, instead of choosing one of these, we're going to take a piece of tape and put a dot on it and put it directly underneath the needle, and we're going to say continue. And then it gives a warning message because since you didn't select any of these, it doesn't know that you have it placed. But we are absolutely sure we're ready to move to the next zone. And you get the same messages you got before unless you say don't show again. So now the machine has moved the needle back, and then you'll advance your quilt and get the needle right over that point and mark this again. So for the sake of example, we're going to pretend that we're at the bottom of the quilt, and a ½ inch below the bottom edge of the quilt top is actually you would be moving your needle a ½ inch below your quilt top, and then so that represents that. So that's your needle a ½ inch beneath that edge. And then this is what you do. You click on the diamonds that are partial. This is a toggle between full and partial. So when you click on the partial, you see it says out of safe area and turns pink. And you're like, oh no. But this is how this feature works. So this is one time. This is perfectly okay. And you don't see any blue dots that would signify a jump stitch. All you have to do now, this is so great, is just pull your bobbin, take that single stitch, pull it up, and hit sew. And when it gets to the far right side, it's going to stitch straight stitches down and come across and do straight stitches and stop. And now you can pull your bobbin and release carriage and move away, move back. I think I said that earlier when we were starting, so you just need to pull it up at that point. But you would move your machine back, grab the thread, move it back, take the stitch, and then you hit back and cut your threads, and you are done. So that's just how fast and simple that it is to do a PowerPanto. At this point, you would just X back to this screen. If you wanted to check your bobbin stitches, then you could go back to the back side of your quilt frame and unroll off of your that take-up rail, watching all of the bobbin stitches as you unroll. See if there's a spot you weren't aware of that needs correcting. It's much easier to make that correction while that quilt is still on the rails, and then you would be able to use your repair pattern to fix any areas that needed it. Hopefully you won't need to, but apart from that, you're done. I hope you've enjoyed this video.